friends, Chubby Meeple here with another Kickstarter preview for you. Today, we're going to be looking at a standalone expansion that goes with Cthulhu, a deck building game. Now, the expansion we're going to look at today is the Horror in Dunwich. It's a standalone expansion that obviously you can get on its own, play on its own, it works just fine, but you can combine it with the base game for some extra crazy madness. So let's jump to the table. I'll give you a brief overview of how it plays and some of the changes between this expansion and the base game, and then I'll come back here and give you my thoughts on Cthulhu, a deck building game, the Horror in Dunwich. Setup for Cthulhu, a deck building game, the Horror in Dunwich expansion, works exactly the same with a couple of tweaks. So you're going to do your basic setup. You're going to select your investigators. In this case, I've chosen a couple of new investigators. The game introduces 11 new investigators, at least in the prototype copy that I have. And I should point out that what you're seeing on camera is a prototype copy. Card quality will likely be improved throughout the Kickstarter campaign, as well as some of the investigators that I have, some of the minion cards, some of the elder gods could end up being stretch goals. I'm not quite sure. So just keep that in mind that you are looking at a prototype copy and things are subject to change. The game introduces, at least the copy I have, has 11 brand new investigators. And for this example, I'm going to use 2 of those new investigators. First, we're going to have the acrobat. The acrobat here allows me to, once per round, she can attempt to nullify the Mythos deck, which is this deck of cards here that provides all of the nasty effects throughout the game. But once per round, the acrobat can attempt to nullify that deck. She will roll a d6, and on a 5 or 6, she will succeed. And if she succeeds, then the Mythos card gets drawn, but its effect gets negated. So that's a very cool ability. It can keep us from taking damage there. She also starts the game with 30 health and 30 sanity. After her death, once she dies in either way, then she's able to, one of the other investigators can attempt to nullify the Mythos deck in the same way that she did when she was alive. So it basically passes her ability on to another person. The other person, or the other investigator we're going to play with today, is the Big Game Hunter. The Big Game Hunter's special ability is that when there's a minion on the board that has 5 or greater health, the Big Game Hunter gets an additional 3 damage for every card that they play to attack with. So each card, in addition to the moxie it provides, will also provide 3 additional damage that can be used to fight anything larger than 5, anything with 5 or greater health. And then after the death, the hunter taught her fellow investigators the weak points on the big game, so once per round, an investigator gets an additional 3 damage on 1 card. So even though these investigators disappear or can die, they still have abilities that pass on to the other investigators. And again, this is a fully cooperative game. Big Game Hunter starts with 35 health and 30 sanity, and those are just marked with these cool little Cthulhu clips. Here that is clip on the card, and the number shows up inside the little hole there on the clip. So that's pretty cool. I do like those. Should also point out the playmat that you see on screen does not come with the game. This will likely be available through the Kickstarter. I can't say for certain. Definitely check out the Kickstarter page for that. But this is an extra mat that I picked up when I had the original deck building game and thought I would just use it for this playthrough example. So you're going to set up, you're going to choose your investigators, you're going to set their starting health and starting sanity. You're going to shuffle up the Mythos cards and create a deck of those Mythos cards that are going to have effects throughout the game. You're going to shuffle the deck of library cards. Now in this example, all of the cards that you see on screen are from the Horror in Dunwich expansion only. This expansion is a standalone expansion. However, you could combine it with the base Cthulhu deck building game and have a really crazy game of elder gods and lots of minions and lots of equipment and things from the library. All of the cards that you'll see here are in the Horror in Dunwich campaign only, and so you won't see anything that's in just the base game. So once you've shuffled up the library, and set it on the board or set it on the table where all players can reach it, you'll fill Miskatonic University with 5 cards like you would do during the normal base game. These are the cards that will be purchased using Moxie throughout the game. Now, one important thing to point out with the Horror in Dunwich expansion is while it adds brand new spells, new equipment, new actions, and new locations, so you still have your same 4 card types, it also introduces 2 new card types to the game. So again, you have your regular spells, your equipment, your actions, and we do have locations as well, so your brand new locations that are introduced into the game. However, the game introduces new types of cards. First, we have gear. Gear essentially acts like equipment, except that it is equipped to an individual investigator, and that investigator gets a benefit. It's basically a permanent benefit that works for that particular investigator. So in this case, if an investigator were to equip the Time Traveler's Watch gear item, wearing this grants them an additional moxie for each starter card. So for each starter card they play from their hand, those cards would be worth an additional moxie that they can use for purchasing, researching additional cards, or for attacking the Elder God or minions that come out. So that's one example of gear. Now gear works, it's kind of a combination of equipment and location. The location cards that come out, so if we have this location that we had here earlier, the Arkham University, this simply adds a slot to the public library. So if this location was out, we'd have it on the board, it would be a permanent effect until something from the Mythos deck or a minion or something else were to remove that location. We would have a 6th slot in Miskatonic University, so we'd have a selection of 6 cards to choose from. With gear, these do have permanent effects as well, however they're equipped to a specific investigator. So if the acrobat that we showed earlier were to purchase this card from the university, and it would be equipped. Each investigator has 2 gear slots, unless otherwise noted by other equipment, or in some cases some investigators actually have special abilities that allow them to carry more gear. So they can carry 2 gear each. And once they have 2 gear, they can purchase 1 gear and basically replace. So you can choose to discard 1 gear to equip a better one. So that's gear. The other item that can come into play are allies. Allies come into play and work kind of similar to locations in that, again, they give you a benefit. However, the ally card is benefiting only the investigator that picked up this card from the university. So in this case with Warren Rice, if this was equipped on the acrobat or was picked up by the acrobat, while Warren is active, the acrobat player would be able to draw an additional card each round. So during the planning phase, they'd be able to draw, our acrobat character would be drawing 6 cards instead of 5, or whatever alters that. If something alters it where she's drawing less cards, she would still get to draw an extra one there. Allies and gear are important differences because, unlike equipment, spells, and actions, when they come into play and they're equipped on a certain investigator, they actually stay out even through the cleanup phase. The only way to get rid of them is for something from the Mythos or for a minion or an Elder God to get rid of them. As long as they're out, they're in effect. One other thing we have to do during setup is one new thing introduced by Horror in Dunwich are Mythos locations. So we have permanent locations that help out the investigators and give them benefits. There are now a set of, I believe there's 10 here in the set that I have, different locations. One of these locations is going to be chosen at random at the start of the game, and that location will be in play throughout the game, and it basically creates a permanent effect. Now, because they're called Mythos locations, you might get the idea that they benefit the Mythos and the Elder God, and while that's true for a lot of them, there are some that actually do help the investigators. I'm just going to take a look at some of these here. So for example, we have the Mass Grave. If this Mythos location were the one to come out, the first minion that dies each round is resurrected and becomes active again. So that's kind of a nasty Mythos location we could have. The Mythos location of Shipwreck, whenever an investigator takes sanity damage, they can draw an additional card from their personal library. So here's a card that benefits the investigators. So you take sanity damage and you have the option of drawing a card from your library. There is also the Mythos location of Innsmouth. If Innsmouth is the Mythos location for the game, the numerical values on investigator locations are multiplied by 2. So in this case, if Innsmouth was our Mythos location out here during the game, and we had the Arkham University location out, this says to add 1 slot to the public library. However, Innsmouth would allow us to add 2 slots. So again, Innsmouth is another card that benefits the investigators. At the setup of the game, one of the Mythos locations is going to be chosen at random, and you're going to grab it. You're going to read it aloud to the player so everyone knows what it does, and then it's going to stay in play. And I would just set it here on the board so that everyone knows it's in play. And so it basically is going to act as a permanent Mythos. So if you remember the permanent Mythos from the Cthulhu deck building base game, it works very similar to that. However, it's already out. It starts the game out and already has some different effects right out of the gate for the investigators to deal with. One of the other things I want to take a look at, and I want to point out as far as differences, every investigator still has their starting hand of 10 cards. So you still start with your 7 sleuth cards and your 3 stagger cards. However, the stagger cards in the Horror in Dunwich expansion are a little different. Before, the stagger cards were just in your way. They were gumming up your deck. I I kind of liken them a little bit to the wounds from the Legendary series of games. They come into your deck. You want to get rid of them because you're just drawing cards that are useless to you. However, the stagger cards in the Horror in Dunwich are actually a little worse. Now, if you play a stagger card from your hand, something happens. There are 3 different stagger cards that you start with, and you'll make sure at the start of the game that each investigator has 7 sleuth cards, and then 1 of each of the new type of stagger cards. So this particular stagger card, if I play this card from my hand, I take 1 health and 1 sanity damage. The other type of stagger card, this next stagger card, is I take 2 health and 2 sanity damage. And then the third one here, I will take 3 health and 3 sanity damage. One thing to point out with these cards, because now they have negative effects, I am not required to play these stagger cards from my hand. I can simply discard them during my cleanup phase, and they won't have the effect. So those effects won't trigger. So I can simply just toss them in my discard pile during the cleanup phase if I don't want to play them. Now, I should point out as well that while I'm not required to play them, there are certain minions and certain Elder Gods and certain Mythos cards that would require me to play cards from my hand. So that is how those cards would get played. So that's just another difference in the setup between the base game and this new standalone expansion, the Horror in Dunwich. So we have our location, our Mythos location, something new out. We have our Miskatonic University stocked up. This location is not in play because that was something that I threw out there. We also will select an Elder God to take on during the game, just like with the deck building game. However, the base game anyway. However, we have some new Elder Gods here. I'm not even going to try to say this name. Sathagawa, something like that. For every Elder God that's active, you're going to draw an extra Mythos card on top of what is already played. So this particular Elder God is going to be drawing extra Mythos cards from the Mythos deck down here, which is not good because those Mythos cards are generally always terrible things for us. So that's the Elder God that we've picked for this particular game. However, there are some other Elder Gods here that are included in the game, some new ones. So this one, this particular Elder God is going to summon two ghouls per round. And while this Elder God is active, any damage that's inflicted by the ghouls actually heals the Elder God. So very tough Elder God to beat. You've got Mordigian. An investigator that gets chosen by a die roll must draw the investigator count cards face down in the next planning phase instead of what they normally do, and they have to play them blindly. So this is one of those cards that could affect you or could cause you to play those stagger cards that cause you damage out of the gate. We have the Great Dreamer, which is an alternate version of Cthulhu from the first game. With this particular Elder God, Cthulhu puts all investigators into a deep sleep. Unless they're already asleep, the investigators will roll a die. If they roll a 4 or higher, they'll wake up and can take their normal turn. Otherwise, they're sleeping, and that sleep will last until the end of the next combat phase. So just a few examples of some of the new Elder Gods that you will see throughout the game. The deck I have here has about 10 different Elder Gods in it. But again, there may be more unlocked as stretch goals. Some of the ones I have may be stretch goals. I do not know. So that is set up. Gameplay is going to progress very much exactly the same as the Cthulhu deck building game. So you have your personal library. Each investigator has their own personal library of 10 cards. You're going to draw 5 of those cards to start with. And then you're going to, each investigator will then do preparation, where they play cards down for Moxie. They're going to research, which is where they're acquiring cards from Miskatonic University. They have a final preparation phase where they can play defensive cards like different pieces of armor or things like that that may reduce health damage or increase attack damage. So being able to play down equipment cards, gear cards, those types of things. It's important to point out and remind that any cards that are played during the preparation or final preparation phases that generate Moxie, if that Moxie is not spent during the preparation phase, it is gone and not available for the combat phase. So you want to make sure that if you have cards in your hand that you're planning to use for combat, that you don't play those during your final preparation step, because that Moxie will go away before you enter combat. So you're going to have those phases. You're going to have your preparation, your research, your final preparation. You're going to then refill the university. Each investigator will take each of those steps. Then we enter the combat phase, where the Elder God triggers. So in this case, we just have the note that every Elder God that's in play triggers an additional Mythos card. We then have the Mythos card that gets drawn. So we draw the top card, and this card, a new one here, is Dark Magic. Dark Magic says to summon the investigator count -1 sorcerers. We have 2 investigators, the Acrobat and the Big Game Hunter. So we're going to summon 1 sorcerer. The sorcerer simply comes out of the minion deck. And this is one of the new minions in the game, the Sorcerer. Each investigator will take 2 sanity damage for every Mythos card that is played while a Sorcerer is active. Now, lucky for us, this Sorcerer wasn't active when that Mythos card was played, so we don't take the 2 sanity damage for this particular, for the Mythos card that just came out that summoned the Sorcerer. However, because of our Elder God, we have to draw a second Mythos card. So we draw a second Mythos card here. This is the Passing of Eons. Investigators must destroy 3 cards at random from their personal library. So this is a nasty card that just really hurts because destroying cards removes them from the game. They're not just discarded. Destroying means they're gone from the game. So at random, each investigator is pulling 3 cards out of their personal library. Now granted, at the start of the game right here, I could get lucky, and some of those cards that I destroyed could be my stagger cards. And because I literally have my personal library of just my 10 starter cards, starter cards are what's getting destroyed, so it's kind of lucky that that came out early. However, that got played. We have a Sorcerer that's active up here, and the Sorcerer's ability reads that each investigator takes 2 sanity damage for every Mythos card that gets played while a Sorcerer is active. So this second Mythos card that came out just dealt 2 sanity damage to each of our investigators, bringing them both down to 28 sanity each. We now move to the investigator combat phase where the investigators can spend Moxie that they have remaining to do damage. So the Sorcerer has 4 hit points. If between the Big Game Hunter and the Acrobat, we can deal 4 damage to the Sorcerer up there, that Sorcerer would be eliminated and would be killed. We could also deal damage to the Elder God up here, who starts the game with 45 health, and try to knock that health down as well. In this case, it may be good to try and take out the Sorcerer because of the ongoing ability of taking sanity damage when we draw Mythos cards. And Mythos cards are always drawn. It's an actual phase of the game. Once that happens, and the investigators have taken their combat turn, then we do a cleanup phase where we simply discard all of the cards that were played with the exception of Gear and Allies. Gear and Allies will stay in play. All the other cards will be discarded, and then we re-enter the planning phase where we draw our hands back up, the investigators go through preparation, research, and final preparation, and then through combat, and the game will continue in this manner until either the investigators have eliminated all Elder Gods that have come into play, because while we started with 1, others may come out. If the investigators can defeat all of the Elder Gods that come out during the course of the game, the investigators win. If all investigators die, then the Elder God or Gods will win the game. So that is Cthulhu, a deck building game, the Horror in Dunwich expansion. I really liked the original Cthulhu deck building game. If you've not seen it, I have a preview, or not a preview, but a review that I did over on the Dice Tower YouTube channel for the base game. I encourage you to check that out if you want to see more about the base game. It plays very similar to what you saw in this video. I really like what this new expansion adds. I love the gear cards and the ability of the investigators to have their own items that they've got. It makes it feel a little bit more thematic. The investigators are still working together. They're still having to cooperate to defeat the minions and the Elder God and the Mythos deck itself. But it's a little bit of more of a uniqueness to, not really unique, but a little bit more of an individualized feel, because your investigators now have their own items that they're researching in Miskatonic Universe and they're acquiring. So, I may have an Acrobat who's got chainmail, so she's not taking a lot of damage, and the Big Game Hunter that we saw in the video may have something that boosts damage, maybe some kind of a gun or something like that. Or maybe something that lets them hold extra cards. But I really like the ability to kind of customize your character a little bit there. It adds just another layer of strategy to the game. And maybe even you focus on cards. I mentioned the one card with the Gambler, of being able to pull the card off the top of your deck, and if it costs 4 or more, you have to pull a Mythos card that gets played instead. Well, maybe knowing that, you make sure you build your deck on cards that all cost 3 or less, so you know you're not going to run into that, and then find a way to get rid of those 3 stagger cards. That way your Gambler's just throwing a bunch of stuff out, a bunch of damage, a bunch of Moxie, and being able to research a lot. So there's some different strategy that comes into the fact that you have new character abilities, a lot of which introduce the rolling of a d6, so a little bit of a luck element that's been introduced into the game. At first I wasn't sure how I was going to like that, because I really liked the strategic nature of the original base game, but rolling the die, the d6, to determine if an ability triggers, or if a particular minion takes damage or not, those die rolls actually add a level of suspense to the game that I didn't expect. I was thinking, okay, it's luck. I want to do this. It's gonna, it's a yes or no. But the suspense that it adds really, kind of negates the luck factor. So I really enjoyed the D6 aspect a little bit more than I thought I would. There are some other keywords that I didn't really mention in the video, things that got introduced in this version. We mentioned the gear and equipping the gear. I briefly mentioned the alternate version of Cthulhu putting people to sleep. There is a sleep keyword that basically makes you skip your turn if you're asleep. So there are ways you can be put to sleep. There's a keyword for drain, any drain ability. So if it says that it drains the investigators for 2, what that means is the investigators lose 2 health and whatever drained them gain 2 health. So very more of a vampire feel to it. So again, the artwork in this is absolutely brilliant. It's gorgeous. Yes, it's dark and it's grim and it can be bloody and kind of gory in a way. So maybe don't play this with younger kids who could be bothered by that, or if you don't want the kids to see that, fantastic. Certainly support that, and I would certainly say maybe keep this for ages 13 and up, just because of the graphic, some of the graphic content. Now, it's not graphic in terms of like nudity or anything like that. It's just blood. Some of the stagger cards, there's a guy with an axe hanging out of his head and things like that. But Graham Sisk, the artist that did the artwork here, also did the artwork on the original game. They've got him back. Great work. It's beautiful. It's stark. It definitely captures the feel of the world that you're in. The art is dark and grim because the world is dark and grim and hopeless. So I really like to capture that. Some of the graphic design choices, if you look at the base game and you look at the expansion, the Horror in Dunwich expansion, there were some graphic design choices that were made that are really subtle, and in fact, when talking to the designer, he actually pointed them out to me. I didn't even notice them on my own, but essentially the words were the words of the locations or the spells or the actions. Before, in the base game, they're all black. So it didn't matter whether it was an action, a spell, an equipment card. It didn't matter. It was all like a black background on the white letters. In the new version, they're actually color coded. So gear is like a bluish color. Your equipment are more of an orangish yellow. So there's different colors that distinguish that, and they really wanted to kind of separate the different types of cards that there are that come out of the university for you to research. And like I said, it's such a subtle change I didn't even notice it. But now that I notice it, it makes a lot of sense. Now I can look up and see, okay, I've got a couple of yellow cards and a blue card and a red card and know exactly what they are without having to look at the keyword that's at the top of the card, which those keywords are still there as well. So even the graphic design choices that were made are really good. I mentioned, really enjoying what the gear and the mythos locations. I really like what the mythos locations add, kind of having a location that all of this is taking place in that can affect the investigators either negatively or positively. Some of those locations actually help the investigators, and in this game, the investigators need all of the help they can possibly get because these elder gods are really tough to take down. A lot of times they're spawning minions that are tough to defeat, and those minions are out for a couple of rounds because you can't, unless you can find a way to ramp up a lot of moxie to take them out, those minions are hanging out for multiple rounds and just getting more minions spawned on top of that. And that's just the elder god. Sometimes that mythos deck will spawn minions as well, and then you get overwhelmed with minions trying to take out the elder god, and you're trying to balance minions who are costing cards out of your hand or doing damage each turn or doing damage as you play cards during combat. So there's some crazy things that happen. Really, overall, love this game. Definitely check this out. There's a link to the Kickstarter in the description of this video. You can jump over to the Kickstarter page, check out the Horror in Dunwich. I highly recommend it. It's a super fun, super difficult cooperative game. I love difficult cooperative games. I love deck builders. I love Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos. So this just checks all the boxes for me. Definitely check this one out. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them if I can. And until next time, keep gaming, friends.